Good evening, everyone, or good day, mate, as they might say in Australia. I'm your host, Angela Aiello, and today we are diving into the wonderful wines from Australia as we bring Australia to your barbecue, or to your grill, as they might say. Tonight is a collaboration with the LCBO and Wine Australia, and luckily we have Mark Davidson, Head of Education for the Americas from Wine Australia, here to dive into these wines, help us through the regions as we taste through tonight, and to learn more about the food and the culture of a region I personally love so much, and I know many of you do too. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for being here tonight.
Pleasure, Ange. Nice to see you. And we've got to do a little bit of work on your Aussie accent, but not bad, not bad. You need to spend a bit more time down there, I think.
I was just going to say an immersive experience. I mean, I have done my fair share of drinking Australian wine, but maybe my twang gets a little better after our tasting here.
It's usually the case.
Well, tonight I know we're going to be tasting 6 wines as part of the LCBO's Aussie BBQ Wine Discovery Box. It's available on lcbo.com, and it also comes with a very cute complimentary tumbler, perfect for the cottage and for your outdoor activities. Now, we'd love for each of you to join us as we go through this tasting, and just a reminder to sip and swirl and savor responsibly as we taste through these 6 wonderful wines. Now, before we jump into the tasting, although I do have to say I have our very first wine here, the Victoria Park Cabernet Sauvignon, ready in my glass, releasing some crazy aromas. I want Mark to bring us through the wine regions, through some maps, because I know many of us learn visually. I, for one, am one of those as well. So, Mark, take us through the regions as we kind of guide our way through our tasting tonight.
Yeah, I think there's lots. I mean, Australia's a big country, and I think that's first and foremost, people need to realize that. If you haven't been there, you probably think it's a bit smaller than it is. It's quite a big country, not as big as Canada, but it's about the same size as continental US. So lots of vineyards spread right across the country. But the key thing is you notice that map where the vineyards are there, those shaded areas, it's all in the south. The north of Australia is too tropical or too desert-like. You've got to go down south, and that's where we're going to be heading specifically into a state of Australia called South Australia, which is 50% of production every year comes out of this state, which makes sense that we're focusing on the state of South Australia, one of the most important wine-producing states in Australia, period. And also home to some of those regions you might be familiar with, like Barossa. You might have heard of Barossa, or McLaren Vale, or Clare Valley, Langhorne Creek, all of which, and McLaren Vale as well, all of which figure into the wines that are part of this lovely little package that you can order.
Now, I know maybe many of us have been to Australia. Maybe we've flown into Sydney. I know we can fly into Melbourne. I think Adelaide is the closest city that has access to a wine country here, yes?
Yeah, Adelaide is wine central, essentially. It's not one of the largest cities in Australia. I think it's 3rd or 4th largest city, but Adelaide itself, in 15 minutes, you're in Adelaide Hills. A couple of hours, you're in Clare Valley, hour and a half, Barossa. McLaren Vale, 45 minutes. I mean, basically, McLaren Vale butts onto the suburbs of Adelaide. So, yeah, very close. And, boy, you can do so much if you base yourself in Adelaide. That's for sure. You'd access all the regions that we're going to be talking about today within, a couple hours' drive, which is really cool.
Well, hopefully there's some people planning their travel and trips over the next little while, or sort of maybe putting together a little destination collection for themselves. I mean, we are opening up our liquid passports tonight, and I know that Australia, I mean, it's a destination for red wine as well. There's some great Riesling and Chardonnay, we'll get into that, but tonight we're really looking at the star-studded reds, aren't we?
Yeah, we've got a history of production of reds. I mean, one of the varieties we're looking at today is Shiraz. I mean, the Shiraz and Cabernet, it's just they're varieties that have done well there. And I think a lot of that's to do with, especially in South Australia, many of the regions in South Australia on the sort of warmer end of what's really good for high quality grape growing. And they just thrive, and that ends up being a little bit of cultural influence there. We like our red wine in Australia, generally speaking, but also just the varieties that were initially brought over to Australia with the first settlers. They thrived in these warmer regions, and they've been around for such a long time, and they've sort of formed the backbone of what Australians drink. But there is a lot more to Australia than red wines. But tonight the focus is with the classics, and why not? Because grilling, barbecue season, and that's what you want to be drinking.
Well, and I was just going to say, I know everywhere in the world kind of has their signature, what they're grilling or barbecuing, or maybe language around the fireside, kitchen. what to you is an Australian barbecue? I mean, what is there a particular type of food that kind of helps, if we were to pick with the perfect meat, let's say, to go with all these dishes, which one would you choose?
Well, tough. We call it Barbie. We call it the Barbie, and we just have a way of shortening. Everything gets shortened, or there's an IE or an O added to whatever your name or whatever it is you're doing. So a Barbie is really traditional in Australia. It's grilling. I mean, if you think about barbecue in the US, for example, that's a very different proposition. But what we do in Canada and in Australia for grilling and barbecue. We put anything. I mean, the joke about a shrimp on the barbie, which we don't say anymore, was sort of a joke, but sort of not really. Anything that you can eat, you basically put it on the barbie at some point. But I'd say that steak and lamb, frankly, are two things that Australians grill a lot. We do a lot of barbecue with both those meats, but then pretty much anything. We don't mind our sausages in Australia. We like all sorts of things, pork and chicken, frankly. So there's all sorts of things you can put on the grill, and don't forget some of the vegetarian options as well, like our fresh vegetables as well.
Well, and I was just going to say, we're going to get into this in a little bit further discussion, but I want to talk about seafood and red wine. We'll get into that a little later, but those rules that maybe are meant to be broken, because I mean, Australia is also a land full of fresh seafood.
Yeah, we smash all those rules. Yeah, for sure. We'll talk about that when we get to some of those other wines.
Yeah, the Aussies like to break a few rules. I mean, it's New World innovation. It's that's what we're getting excited about tonight. I know the Victoria Park Cabernet Sauvignon that we have here, that's a 2016. This is a wine that's vegan and sustainable. I mean, just smelling this wine is so aromatic. I'm getting violets and layers of dark berries and chocolate and spice. I mean, this wine is jumping out of the glass at me in aromas.
Yeah, delicious. Cabernet Sauvignon has been in Australia for a long time, as long as Shiraz has been, but it wasn't initially as popular as Shiraz. I think Shiraz thrived a bit more. Cabernet took a while to find its sort of comfortable home, and one of the homes is where most of the fruit says South Australia here, so technically the grapes could come from anywhere. But I happen to know these grapes came from the Riverland area, which is a beautiful area. Pretty much, thrives on the Murray River, which is our largest river. I'm trying to think of a comparable river. I always say when I'm talking in the US, look, the Mississippi. The Murray is kind of like our Mississippi. It's a big river. And there's lots of great grape growing around there, and a great grape growing tradition. And I think it's a warmer region, and you get all those lovely things that you want from a warmer region. Cabernet, which is soft, berry fruit and sort of really aromatic, but really juicy fruit and soft kind of tannins. That's what I love about Cabernet from up in this area.
Now, I've jumped into the wine here because I did pre-pour it, but I know that there's a great video that we're going to show everyone to kind of gets us into the mood, because we haven't been able to travel. So show us Australia in this wonderful video and tell us what.
Well, this little video is cool. It goes pretty quick, but it sort of touches on the cool things that I think shape the color and the flavor and the texture of Australian wines right now. And it's going to be coming up right now. So we're focused on South Australia and the kind of cool things: Barossa, Eden Valley. And then, as you can see, this is the lay of the land, the vineyards. Old vines are a really important piece of the puzzle, as you can see here. Tradition, mountains and sort of hilly areas are really help shape the flavors and textures as well. The soil as well is really important. Not many people know the oldest geological structures anywhere in the oldest soils and geology on the planet exist in Australia. Coonawarra is a region where it has famous old soils dating back 500 million years. And then there's the ocean. When you get to McLaren Vale and Langhorne Creek, the ocean plays a really important piece of the puzzle. Actually, it's important in most of it, but you look at this and you go, okay, yeah, we're drinking wine, but what do you want to do right now? You want to drink that wine on the beach in McLaren Vale, I bet, looking at that right now. And so all those things are really important sort of triggers and elements that I think form the character and quality of the wines in Australia right now. And we've got to remember those grapes all came from other countries. Like native grapes didn't exist in Australia, yet all those varieties that we might know from elsewhere, they don't taste the same in Australia. They're different, and all those things that we looked at, I think, are part of what shapes the flavor and character and texture of the wines in Australia right now.
Well, and South Australia actually is home to some old vines. I mean, old Cabernet Sauvignon, no?
Yeah, it's home to the oldest Shiraz, oldest Cabernet, oldest Grenache, Mourvedre. There's a whole pile of varieties, and that's because the vines came in the mid 1800s before a little vine pest. Some of you, the geekiest amongst us, might know about a little pest that destroyed all the vineyards in Europe, and they had to graft them. that hasn't happened in parts of Australia. In South Australia, the entire state of South Australia has never had phylloxera. So those vines that went in the ground in the mid-1800s are still growing today and still producing some amazing wines, which is quite remarkable. You think of an agricultural product that year after year for over 150 years continues to produce. That's kind of cool.
And the one thing I love about these wines too is that elegance, that freshness is coming through. And I think, you know, out of all these wines, I think that's what we're gonna. I did happen to pre-taste them, but one thing I did sort of taste in all of them is this elegance of Australia. Tell me what that actually.
Yeah, well, I think it's also, that's a sort of an evolution, and I think winemaking style has changed a little bit in the last 10 to 15 years. The basic flavors and aromas and character have sort of been shaped a little bit, but what we love and know about Shiraz and Cabernet is still there. But I do think there's just this precision right now, and there's a vibrant fruit kind of character and quality that exists, and I think that's to do with understanding viticulture better, being a bit more gentle with the winemaking process, a little more hands-off. But the reality is, that's what you want for barbecue, especially. You want that freshness, that gorgeous fruit, and we have that in abundance in Australia.
Yes, we have this amazing complementary and contrasting pairing kind of going on with these wines and the barbecue. You've got the smokiness of the barbecue, fruitiness of the wines. We have the protein of our dishes, and then you have the, you know, the tannic and the strong and strength of the palate to kind of balance that all out. It's a very interesting way to pair photo wine.
Yeah, for sure. So the Victoria Bar, just another sip. That's delicious. That's showing beautifully right now. It's perfect barbecue. Perfect barbecue wine.
It's really nice. It's really quite nice. And I think this is like a classic, you know, the Victoria Park is great with grilled mushrooms, maybe some grilled eggplants. And I mean, your classic burgers. This is a wonderful wine to go to for classic burgers.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. You could even mix it up a little bit. Turkey burgers. I love playing around with turkey and doing turkey and sage. Beautiful
Nice.
thing to do on the grill, and that would be really good with that Cabernet too.
Yeah, adding those accoutrements, even though it adds a little fruitiness, accoutrement to your burgers, I think really would help bring out some really elevated characteristics in these wines. Now, the second wine that we have is a Rosemont Estate, the diamond label. I feel like, you know, it's coming up on the screen here. Everyone has recognized and tasted this wine throughout the course of, if you're a red wine lover, you've had to have been here. And so it's an ultimate favorite. And Shiraz, I mean, it's got a heartstring for me. It is my favorite red grape. So I'm really looking forward to tasting this.
Yeah, I mean, Shiraz that's our benchmark variety. It's the most planted red variety in Australia. It's actually the most planted variety in Australia, period, red or white. Of the, 140,000 hectares of grapes in Australia, 40-something thousand of them it's Shiraz. So very important variety. Some of the oldest Shiraz exists, and also it's grown in virtually every region, and there are different expressions. And what I love about this is a combination of Langhorne Creek and McLaren Vale, so two regions quite close together. I think the McLaren Vale-ness, if there is such a word, comes through in this particular one. I'll talk about that in a minute. But Rosemount itself has been an estate that's been in Canada for a long, long time. I'm embarrassed if I think about how much of this wine I've drunk over the years. It might be sort of embarrassing, so we'll avoid it. But lovely stuff. It's always been a fan favorite, and I've always loved it too. And I think the characteristic, to my mind, that is a little different, it's a little more sort of defined sort of Shiraz characteristic out of McLaren Vale. It's blueberry. There's this blueberry fruit thing that I think jumps out of the glass, and I think that's a really delicious quality of McLaren Vale, along with that spice and pepper that we know and love about about Shiraz in general, which is there's warmth and there's spice and there's a sort of comfort in that at the same time. But that blueberry, I think, is what I'm going to check my blueberries out right now.
Yes, I was just going to say I picked wild blueberries as a kid. You know, you got paid for it by the pound. It was the most horrible job. It was so hard. I only did it for one season. But you're absolutely right. Right off the nose, a quart of blueberries in your face, which is really quite lovely. I mean, this time of year, that's sort of really what you want.
Yeah, it's totally true. It's lovely, lovely stuff. Yeah, as soon as I taste this, it's like, yeah, that's, I would even with all of these wines, actually, I think there's nothing wrong with putting some of these red wines. I'm a big fan in the summertime. Put red wines in the fridge for 10 minutes. Not cold. We're not talking about icy cold, but just take a little edge off, especially if you're bringing the bottles outside in the warm temperatures. I think it really enhances that fruit quality. Question from Angela is it found in the vintages? I'm going to leave that one up to you, Ange. Someone from Nikki is asking a question.
I know that it is $14.95, and I believe that it is part of the Discovery box. Let me just double check with the LCBO if it's a vintages product, and we'll get back to you. We'll go right back to that.
Awesome.
So now I'm tasting
delicious.
this wine, and it's so good. I mean, that's like just. I don't even know how to describe. It's literally like so much fruit on your palate. A little more fruity than the Victoria Park, which is a little bit more sort of spice, but this is definitely a fruity version if you love those fruity reds, but elegant, not strong tannins. It's super smooth and silky.
Yeah. Textbook McLaren Vale Shiraz, and like I said, there's some Langhorne Creek characteristic in there too, but I think the McLaren Vale thing is what's really showing through. And yeah, but I also think that you see that sort of more modern, if it really is modern, sort of styling of Shiraz now, which is that freshness. You talked about it earlier. There's this juicy, vibrant fruit, and I think that's just winemaking in general that's been sort of evolving, and we've been tinkering with it in Australia. I think it's a global thing too. I think fresher, more vibrant wines is just sort of more historic, and I think is more the sort of current way of doing things. You think about red wines historically, the red wines, you age them well or not. Some of them you drink when they're young and they're juicy and fresh, and I think that's a great example of one that could age, but yeah, try keeping your hands off it. You're going to want to drink it.
Well, and the nice thing about all of these wines is they're screw cap. Very easy to open. You don't need a corkscrew, so it's kind of lovely even for the cottage to be able to just have that and have it really easy to open when you're entertaining family.
Yeah, it's a tradition in Australia, and it's a lot of it. People sometimes ask me, "Oh, gee, was screw cap better?" It's like, well, it kind of depends. I mean, we think it is, and we think that from a winemaker perspective, it gets wine to you from Australia to you in Canada or wherever you might be in as close a condition as it did when it left the winery, and the winemaker wants you to have it. Cork can create issues with a taint problem, and the reality is that it's just the best way. And I think, there's still a study that I think they did in the United States, and they said that, most wine purchased is drunk within 48 hours. It's like, well, not exactly cellaring things that much right now. We're drinking them. It's like 95% of wines purchased, they're just drunk. So screw cap's awesome. It's brilliant. Indicates freshness.
Absolutely, and it's one part of Australia I love is that there's so many wines that are a screw cap, making them nice and easy to open. And also, I could get back to this comment we had earlier about red wine and fish. So as I pour our Yellowtail Big Bold Red, which I think everyone is very familiar with Yellowtail. I mean, it was a superstar and still is a superstar in the category. I think people gravitate towards it. They've had it before when it first came out, and they're very loyal to it.
Yeah, it's a global sensation, this wine, in the sense that it was so popular around the world that Harvard Business School made reading about the Yellowtail story part of their business program. It was mandatory reading. It's a brilliant story, but it's also a brilliant wine. There's a reason why it's a good story. The wines are awesome. They're accessible. They've introduced so many people to just red wine drinking, period, but also wine drinking and Australian wine drinking. And yeah, I mean, I think if you haven't heard of Yellowtail, or at least tasted, most people have tasted. If you haven't heard of it or tasted it, there's a strong chance you've been living in a cave for like 10 years because it's so popular. And I love this. I tried this a few moments ago, so I haven't had this in a while. And it says Big Bold Red, and there are those characteristics, but there's that freshness there too. And the alcohol's not really high. It's like 13.5%. And this is bold and rich, but with that precision and that vibrant fruit at the same time. And I think that's still an important piece of the puzzle. So,
yeah, juicy, fruity. It's approachable. I mean, this wine is probably easily paired with one of your favorite Netflix films, or one of your favorite, sausages on the barbecue as well. I mean, some smoky, sticky ribs. Even with this, I feel like that sweetness will really help kind of bring out even a little bit of a spicy. It'd be very good.
Yeah, pork, some bratwurst with this. Yeah, I can see that working really well with some grilled onions. Yeah, really, really nice. Brilliant wine. And just an ongoing sort of success story with Yellowtail and a style that's, boy, there's not much to there's nothing complicated about this wine. There's not much that confuses you. It's like, it's beautiful fruit, it's easy, it's accessible, and it's affordable, and it's lovely stuff.
And I mean, wonderful to use in a marinade too, if you're marinating different meats overnight, if you're pulling that together. I mean, wonderful to have as you're preparing for maybe with the barbecue, getting it started. It's great to have when you're at the barbecue, and great to have with your food too.
Yeah, I know. I have a funny tradition in that, like wines like Victoria Park or possibly the Big Bold Red would be. Sometimes I'm just trying to decide what wine I'm going to have, and I will have a glass of wine while I'm trying to decide what wine I'm going to have for the night. And that might be one of them actually. So okay, well, I'll have a glass while I contemplate what I'm going to drink tonight. But I also think that yeah, they've got that lovely, accessible and easy drinking style that I think is sort of defined that characteristic. So it's lovely, easy to drink, and you could maybe even talk about the fish with that a little bit, or talking about seafood. But
I was gonna say sometimes there's always that sweet chutney that might be used on your fish too, right? So this is an interesting way to kind of add some sweet chutney onto your fish to kind of really complement this type of wine style. And I know that people have sort of been ingrained with the fact that you do white wine and with white fish or with fish, and then red wine, red meat. I mean, obviously from a color perspective that works, but there are some some seafoods that work with red wine.
I'm a big fan. I come from a sommelier background, and I was always quite anarchistic, strangely, about sort of wine and food pairing. I feel like get a plate of food you like, get a wine you like, and start from that perspective. And in Australia, we like to sort of challenge convention a little bit. And I think also the way wines are made now, red wines especially, they're easier. They're not as tannic and as sort of meant for the cellar as they used to be, say 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I think the crossover sorts of things, and often it's kind of what you do with it. I had swordfish the other day, a grilled swordfish, but I used a harissa on it, and it was a bit more spicy and brought a sort of an almost sort of Middle Eastern characteristic to it. And frankly, that pulled it into red wine territory. Things like tuna, red wine. Salmon can be played around with Pinot, maybe not some of the wines we're dealing with tonight, but mahi-mahi, another firm-fleshed fish that is white, but it's also quite concentrated, and that works really well with red wines as well.
Yeah, you really want to pair the weight of the wine with the weight of the fish. So if there are, fish that are definitely do have more texture, more weight, those are the ones you want to play with in this category. And your accompaniments. What are you sort of accompanying with your fish? What's the strongest flavor on the plate? Sorry, and in your palate that's really where your pairing is coming from. The strongest flavor on the plate. Mm-hmm.
Totally. There's a question about the grape varieties in Big Bold Red. It's a combination. I'm not really 100% sure if it's mostly Shiraz. I'm saying Shiraz and Cabernet, and there might be a bit of Grenache and Mourvèdre in there. I don't have the full list in front of me, but it's a blend. It's not a specific variety in the Big Bold Red.
Now I poured the Jacobs Creek Double Barrel Shiraz from Barossa Valley. What a beautiful place in South Australia. I remember waking up to the sunshine and the fog. I mean, what a gorgeous little part of Australia.
Yeah, this is awesome stuff. And Jacobs Creek they do wines from all across the country, and this is a South Australia blend, but the vast majority of the fruit here comes from Barossa, right, which is right where they're based. Jacobs Creek actually is a place. And it's interesting because that was one of the brands that was probably better known prior to Yellowtail becoming famous in the early 2000s. Jacobs Creek was one of the more popular wines across Canada, the US, and certainly in the UK. So it's nice to see this. And what I love about this is about innovation. This is about sort of playing around with classic red wine styling, but doing something else to change the flavor profile. And that's the barrel. And they put it into a different style of barrel to pick up different characteristics that I think, quite frankly, complement the fruit and the basic flavors of this wine, which is kind of cool.
Oh, I mean, this wine's got smoky written all over it. I mean, This screams barbecue to me, this wine. You can play with so many great foods. You can grill up some carrots with a little bit of char on the bottom. Make sure you get that little bit of black char to complement those flavor profiles. What about some smoky bacon, on your burger that you really want to get out that smokiness? I think bring out the element of both smoke on the Barbie and smoke in your glass too, and add them together for an adventure.
Yeah, this makes me think of kind of doing some sort of like meat, like brisket that you've sort of smoked and put it on a sandwich and slathered with sort of almost a smoky, sweet barbecue sauce, and then just sort of realizing you have a big, smiley, messy-looking face at the end of it. It's this is absolutely delicious. I think this has got smoked meat all over it, like smoked grilled meat all over it. Yeah, lovely. Really lovely wine.
And if you don't feel like cooking, there's some great barbecue content on Netflix too to watch. Just like such great barbecue. They feature different barbecue chefs from around the world. It's really kind of lovely to watch that. So I mean, you compare with great content on TV too.
Cool. The
I
question
remember.
about cheese that goes with fresh and fruit-forward red wines. I'm going to let you start with that one, Ange. What would you say? And then I've got a thought too.
Oh, I mean, this is, I think white wine lends itself really well to cheese. I think everybody goes red wine and cheese, which I mean you can do, and I'll get through that in a moment. But white wine and cheese, I kind of think is the bee's knees to me. When it comes to red wine, I mean, blue cheese is a no-brainer, and obviously there's a big section of what blue cheese is. There's so much variety in this category, but experimenting with different types of blue cheese, that interesting, that strong flavor and texture and creaminess that's going to come out of your palate is going to pair so interesting with these fruit forward and yet somewhat smoky wines, which is why they're paired with the barbecue. But you could also go, I mean, there's so many interesting wines heading into the cheese boutique or your household fromagerie that's down in your neighborhood. There's so many great wines that can go with this. You could do an aged cheddar with this, but you really want to pair something that's weighted. And when I talk about weight, that's why blue cheese and red wine really work, because the blue cheese has so much character, weight, and basically texture on your palate that you really want to leverage these wines. So, I mean, there's definitely some ways to experiment.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I like the richness and the softness of blue cheeses, and depending on the type of blue cheese, but also there's almost a sweetness and certainly that saltiness, I think, that counterbalances the rich, ripe fruit on the wines here. And I think that's kind of what I'd look for. Softer, richer, creamier cheeses, I think, will be absolutely delicious with it. But I have to concur with your white wine comment. I think it's one of those things that throughout my history working as a sommelier, you get back and you go, wow, I love red wine with cheese, but man, so many white wines are really flexible too. But in this case, Sandeep, the answer to that question, I'd say richer, sweet, rich, concentrated, soft cheeses, I think are the answer, if not blue cheeses. Agree with you completely.
Yeah. I would even say head into the Manchego category where you're saltiness, you've got some weight, and you can pair it right into that. So the saltier the cheese, I think the better the pairing, to be completely honest. I would definitely not want to put mild cheeses with these wines. I definitely want wine, definitely unctuous texture and very heavier driven cheeses would go better with these wines.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that smokiness in that wine's delicious. Yeah. Wow, that's really there. It's there.
There's definitely, you can smell the smoke on the oak on this, and it's. I mean, I remember when this wine came
right
out.
Now.
Beef brisket, yeah, exactly. It's delicious though. I mean, it's probably, this is a 2018. I don't know. It launched just in the last 5-6 years or so, but I think people are really enjoying the style. Really like full-bodied reds. This is a style that I think is coming through in a few different producers here and there, but Jacob's Creek was the leader, I think, in this type of production.
Yeah, it's great. A little bit of innovation, a little sort of different flavor profile takes you into a new area, and I think that's kind of fun.
Yeah, like the Aussies, like you said, the rules sometimes need to be broken a little bit, and we need to experiment a little bit more, and get out of our classic traditional chairs and find something new and exciting to try.
Totally agree.
But speaking
the
of
nature of Australians. Love it.
Speaking of a classic, we have Penfolds up next, which is a very exciting wine. We have a Shiraz Cab, this sort of classic, interesting blend.
Yeah, I think it'd be difficult to walk into any wine store anywhere in Australia and not find this wine, but certainly not find a Penfolds wine. It is this estate that has been, it's basically been defining Australian wine and Australian fine wine for decades. I was effectively weaned on this wine growing up in Australia. I love this, and I love it, number one, because there is this style that Penfolds shapes, which is just seamless, beautifully balanced, elegant wines with just, everything. There's nothing sticking out. It's just beautifully seamless and balanced. But it also speaks to a very classic blend in Australia that there are other places doing this now, but we kind of were, I don't know if pioneer is the right word, but we certainly sort of made it our own, which is a Shiraz Cabernet combination. And it's usually a bit more Shiraz than Cab, or a bit more Cab than Shiraz, but somewhere in that 50-50, 60-40 kind of a range. And I think it's a beautiful combination. You get the structure of the Cabernet. There's the interesting flavor profiles from Cabernet, which are a bit more sort of minty and cassis. And then you get this gorgeous, soft, approachable fruit that sort of fills out. It's almost like having the frame of the house is the Cabernet, and all the stuff inside the house is the Shiraz. So there you get this full sort of fully furnished house with Shiraz Cabernet blends. But I think it's kind of fun. I love this stuff. I think that's just, that's home to me. I smell that, oh yeah, that's had more than my fair share of Canunga.
Well, and I think that's the thing too. You bring out, when you smell a wine, it smells like Australia. I think once you start to really dive into smelling wines from different regions, certain regions do tend to have an aroma that is, memorable and that you can remember in a tasting.
Totally. Yeah, it's identifiable. I think it's all those things, and that's the thing when you get into the geekiness of blind tasting, there are characteristics, and it's like we talked about the blueberry quality of Shiraz in McLaren Vale, and it's just kind of the way it goes. There's regional signatures, and I think that's where the excitement really lies in Australia, all these different regional wines. So that's fun. But yeah, Canunga Hill, I mean, how delicious is that? It's like,
it's 10 months in oak. It's elegant. It's fruit forward, but it's got that richness of the Cabernet. You can almost smell the structure. I like how you put it. Like very visual. It's like the structure is the Cabernet, and then the fruit and the aroma, a lot of the Shiraz. And I mean, this smells just delicious to me. I think you talked earlier about being sort of a baby Grange, if you will, and Penfolds Grange being the most expensive Australian wine in Australia.
It's one of the brilliant things about Penfolds. It's a bigger, larger company for sure, but if you've got Canunga Hill, which is totally accessible, totally affordable, and totally beautiful wine. You've also got one of the most expensive wines produced annually in Australia in Grange. That's the top wine. It's a $600-700, depending on the market, you're in $600-700 bottle of wine, and everything in between. So, and that's for a big wine company, they've always just been right on top of their game, and you just can't go wrong. You pick up a bottle of Penfolds wine, you can't go wrong. So
yeah, I mean, this is a special. This is a barbecue wine. This is definitely something you're putting into a steak category. I mean, you could put a nice tomahawk on the grill. This is kind of where you want to go, right? That's a little bit of bone in kind of meat is nice for this one.
Totally agree. Get your best steaks, slap those on the barbecue, and whether it be a big T-bone. I love the tomahawk idea. That is fun. That is fun to do. I always think I can eat more than I can, but that's another story. But yeah, get your best meat out and use it for that. I mean, another thing to potentially consider, and I think with this wine too, and possibly the next wine from Clare Valley is lamb. We do a lot of lamb in Australia. It's not as common outside. I mean, I know Canadians absolutely eat lamb. I've certainly ate my fair share in Canada, but the reality is that in Australia, you go to a butcher shop, and it's funny because the beef section is always a bit smaller than the lamb section, which is the other way around here in Canada, and certainly in the US where I'm living right now, actually. But lamb is awesome, and there's all sorts of different cuts that you can play around with. You can have boned out shoulder of lamb, you can have a leg of lamb boned out and grilled, and then you can just do with some great little lamb chops on the grill. I think it's a perfect way to sort of change up the flavor profile and get excited.
So you bring up a really great point. I mean, that that lamb tends to have gaminess, a little bit of gaminess to it, depending on where you're getting your lamb from, etc. And the fruitiness of this wine, I think, really helps to sort of blend everything together. Some people don't like the gaminess of lamb, and adding this wine into the category, I think, really helps bring out a different profile of the lamb in a way.
Yeah, it's a stronger flavored meat. I don't find it I think some people find it a bit overpowering. I love the flavor of lamb. I think it's in the same way that Canunga Hill makes me think of home. Whenever I eat lamb, I'm like, I feel like I'm back in Australia. But I think and I think that's the beautiful piece of the puzzle here is that some of the eucalyptus, sometimes minty kind of qualities that you can find in Cabernet, they're just such a lovely accompaniment to lamb and that stronger sort of flavor. And the structure of the wines cuts through that sort of characteristic, that sort of gamey characteristic. I think it's a beautiful wine, a beautiful food, a beautiful meat actually to pair with wine. I like it for that reason. Opens up a new palette of flavors.
Even you have lamb shoulder, you have lamb shank, you have lamb rack. Totally. It's like there's this amazing plethora of ways you can experiment with lamb. And usually you're cooking it with rosemary and mint sauce, which also makes it the ideal pairing with these wines as well. Yeah,
awesome. Delicious. I'm getting hungry.
I was going to say, so on to our very last wine, the Wakefield Estate Shiraz from Clare Valley. Now, I know Clare Valley is a very special place, and Wakefield is an amazing producer. I talk a lot in my recently about wines that give back, and Wakefield actually has put together Project Seahorse, where they're saving seahorses and helping the oceans get better in Australia and also in Nova Scotia, working with UBC. So what a wonderful project that they're working with in Wakefield. But it is a wonderful, they also have seahorses on their labels, as you might be able to see from when we showed you the labels. So this wine from Clare Valley is a very special place.
Yeah, well, Australians are, I mean, we're quite sensitive, winemakers especially, and grape growers, we're sensitive to the environment. And I think those sorts of projects, you can find any number of them. I really applaud with their efforts with what they're doing with seahorses and sort of marine sort of restoration in general. But there's a lot of producers doing similar things with native vegetation and what have you in Australia. But Clare Valley itself is like, the guy I met in the Clare, he said, oh, there are two types of people who were born in Clare and people who wish they were born in Clare. He was from Clare, so I think he's probably a tad biased, but it is a really special place. And it's an unusual place in the sense there's not many regions in the world where there's a few, but you can't have Riesling, which is it's one of the benchmark regions in Australia for Riesling, side by side with Shiraz and Cabernet. That's kind of weird. You think, oh, you have to, you can count on one hand the amount of regions that are doing that. And that's why the unique climate of Clare, it's about altitude first and foremost. It's about cooling breezes that come up through the valley. And it's also about temperature shift at night. It's warm during the day, no question. Warm enough to ripen Cabernet, warm enough to ripen Shiraz, but the temperature drops from anywhere from 30 degrees, 35 degrees during the growing day to 6 degrees. And one grape grower said it like this. He said, oh, look, you can get up in the morning get to the afternoon. You can see the grapevines are just sort of sagging a little bit. They wake up in the morning, they've had dew on them. It's cool down at night and they're all ready to go for the next day. And I thought a little bit of a human sort of element to that, but I can see that. You need a bit of a rest at night. If it was hot all night and hot all day, I'd be lying down a little bit too. But that's the key element that I think shapes the character of Shiraz and Cabernet and the wines in general, but certainly Shiraz. You get those cool nights that keeps this refreshing sort of acidity in the backbone of the wine, but you still get the warm days for the gorgeous, generous fruit.
Yes, for the techie or for the technical geeks out there, we like to call this a diurnal shift in temperature, and some of the best wine regions in the world have that diurnal shift. And I always think of it like a human too, kind of exactly what you said. Like in the daytime, in an ideal day for me, I'd love to be sitting up by the pool, really hot, getting warm, and then in a cool place to sleep. And that really is what grapes need as well for development of elegance and restful time periods, and not to get overripe too quickly, because too hot, it doesn't lead you to more jamminess than elegance in your wines.
Yeah, good point. It's not as restful asleep when it's really, really hot, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
So true. Yeah. No, a very special place, Clare Valley. It's and I think just a slightly different sort of flavor profile to what's going on with McLaren Vale. I think you're getting a more concentrated sort of Shiraz quality there, and maybe a bit more structure, maybe a bit more full bodied, along with the Coonagga Hill. I'd say, yeah, this is a bit more for your serious. Put this over with your serious steaks.
I would definitely say the tannins are coming out a bit stronger than a lot of these other wines, and I'm craving cheese or a burger, and I'm craving just to smell the smoke of a barbecue. That's for sure. But I definitely can taste that on my palate. My palate's getting a little bit more dry as we've sort of moved along this tasting.
Yeah, for sure. Lovely stuff. I think that's a gorgeous wine, and is a nice example of, and it's kind of fun to try these wines side by side, because I think we're all a bit guilty of saying, I love Australian Shiraz, and I think, well, we don't say I love American Cabernet, do we? We always talk about a place. So I think we need to be talking about our places a little bit more often, and I think this is a nice way to experiment with place. The Rosemont's from a different area. You've got the Wakefield that's from Clare Valley, and they're different. There's similar characteristics and qualities, but they're actually quite different at the same time. I think that's exactly what regional expression is all about, and I think that's what's nice to have a couple of those regional expressions in this box. That's cool, very cool.
I think that's the greatest part about getting a discovery box too, is that you have similar wines, but you're looking at the nuanced differences of each of these bottles, and that's really what makes you from a wine drinker to a wine enthusiast, then ultimately a wine aficionado, and then somewhere along the line you become a collector. Hopefully, if you can afford a wine fridge or have a big enough space, or have a great, a dad that holds all your stuff in the bottom of his Italian cellar. But yeah, exactly. Those nuanced characters of these wines. I mean, that's what's so great about doing a tasting like this, is you actually get a very interesting lens on one area, but into it sort of all these microclimates in different areas and the strengths of each region.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing is it's that this is the box is a nice little snapshot of a particular style of wine that Australia's well known for, which is reds. We do a good job with it, but you know they don't all taste the same. They taste different. There's different sort of structures, different characteristics, and the nice thing about Australia in general is that there's 65 different regions. There's so much to explore, and you're getting a snapshot in a nice sort of tidy little box of classic reds that are perfectly suited to what you're doing here with grilling and barbecuing at this time of year. But Australia is it's a massive tapestry of all sorts of different wine styles and different flavors. And yeah, you'll never be bored. You can just drink Australian wine forever. Well, hey, I drink wines from all around the world, but yeah, you'd never be bored in Australia though, that's for sure.
Well, thank you, Mark, for a wonderful tasting and for leading us through these amazing wines. I'm looking forward to having a glass with my dinner tonight. And head to LCBO.com and check out the recipes. I mean, you and I mentioned some great menu items tonight that I think we're going to go lovely with these wines. So check out those for some great recipes. Feel free to buy the Discovery Box on LCBO.com, get it delivered to your home, purchase it in store, or arrange the same day pickup. I know Mark's on Instagram. You can give him a follow, give me a follow. Follow Wine Australia at Wine Australia. Follow LCBO, hashtag Aussie Wine. And if you're looking for more information on Australian wine, other than planning your trip, which you should do for in the future time when we're able to, go to australianwine.com. Thank you, Mark, for your wonderful Aussie expertise. It's been a wonderful evening.
Pleasure. Nice to see you. Cheers.
Cheers.
South Australia, South Australia.